I finally got to see a Mike Green moment on day 2 of the Senior Bowl.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for 2 decades almost, formerly at falcfans.com RIP. You may also know me as Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. aka, and I thank each and every one of you that has been an everydayer of this podcast. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everyday is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, guys, I am coming from you once again from an undisclosed location in Mobile, Alabama, and we're talking all about the Senior Bowl Day 2 standouts. We'll talk about some of the Georgia players, some other odds and ends that I observed on Day 2. We'll complain about practice structure. Yes, we will be talking about practice, man. I think we'll start off talking about the big moment that I've been waiting for. This is one of the things I wanted to see at the Senior Bowl this week, which was a big moment for Marshall edge rusher Mike Green. And we'll talk about that in a second. But first, I want to say, focusing on the trenches, that's what will be the bulk of what our conversations have been all week long and will continue to be this week on the podcast, because we know that's where the Falcons could definitely use a lot of help, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, focusing on those pass rushers. And I thought overall on day 2, the offensive line kind of the Empire Strikes Back, so to speak. The offensive line kind of struck back today, where I thought they had the better of the day collectively against some of these pass rushers. And that's notable just because something that we pointed out going into the week is that these one-on-one drills that we're really talking about as we break down today's episode are really geared towards the defense. And so when the offensive line are winning, that says a lot more. But, I thought in the national practice, there was a lot more back and forth between the offensive and defensive line in terms of wins. I thought in the American practice, the offensive line was firmly in control. There were maybe the defense started getting a little bit more late wins late in practice. But, I feel like collectively the best reps of the day from the defensive line, at least, came in the national practice. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they got more work in these one-on-ones in 12 minutes versus 8 minutes. And we'll talk more about that when I complain about the structure of the practice. But getting into the big topic of the day, Mike Green, the Marshall edge rusher, had a big win against Josh Conerly, one of the top offensive tackles down here in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Conerly Jr. of Oregon, where he was able to basically bull rusher. Conerly had a questionable kick step on that, didn't have his base under him, and got completely road graded on a rep from Mike Green. And I'm sure many of you, if you're on Twitter and other social media, that clip will go viral on NFL Network and all those various things. So that will be one of those clips that they highlight. I remember a play many years ago with Montez Sweat. I think it was Titus Howard at the time. And Montez Sweat just kind of bullied Titus Howard on a rep. And that's a clip that they show constantly from the Senior Bowl. And so this is important because if you listen to yesterday's episode, I probably wasn't praising Mike Green to the degree that maybe other people were from his day 1 of the Senior Bowl, just because to me, one of the big questions I had going into this week with Mike Green was, can he win effectively against better competition than he faced consistently in the Sun Belt this past year? And I know Mike Green has the speed and the quickness and the bend and all those various things. Can you win in other ways beyond that? And the main way I wanted to see him win was with power. We didn't really get to see that. He tried one bull rush on day 1 against Ariante Ursary of Minnesota, and that wasn't particularly effective. And he was able to do it today against Josh Conerly Jr. of Oregon. And so that's something that I really wanted to see. And so, it's funny because it's like when Green was trying to use his more finesse moves today, they were not particularly effective. And basically that one rep against Connerly was really like his one signature win of the day. But like, this is why, like, I sit here and I think that a lot of people get the Senior Bowl stuff and a lot of the pre-draft evaluation, whether we're talking about combine and pro days and all this stuff, because I think a lot of this goes back to something we talked about earlier in the week, which is like, I don't think people ask the right questions about these prospects. Like, it's not just, hey, this guy looked good in practice. Like, these are all football players that have played at college football at a high level, that most of these guys are going to get drafted. I think like 110 Senior Bowl guys got drafted last year out of like the 130 guys that were at the Senior Bowl, 130 plus guys that got invites and played in practice at the Senior Bowl last year. So all these guys are quote unquote NFL caliber players. And so the idea of like, oh, this guy looks good in practice, it's like, all right, like they all should look good in practice because they've been doing this for, 22, 23 or whatever years, or maybe not that long since they didn't come out of the womb practicing football. But it is one of those things where like, I think a lot of people go into these weeks looking at these players and saying, hey man, like this guy did this X, Y, and Z in practice. And it's like, okay, but like that wasn't a concern for me. Like, for example, Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, he had a good day of day 2 of practice, but like the ways that Shamar Stewart was to me consistently winning were ways that he won consistently based off of what I saw watching him at Texas A&M, which was power. And so like, I didn't have any questions about Shamar Stewart's ability to be able to just basically bully NFL offensive tackles. And so him coming into the Senior Bowl on day 2 and winning more consistently because he was basically relying on his power, to me, again, that's great for other people that were like, I didn't know Shamar Stewart could do this. But for me, I'm just like, I knew this already. It's the same sort of principle, guys. And basically the point I'm trying to make is like a fast guy running fast. Like, we'll talk about Arian Smith, the Georgia wide receiver. But if and when he goes to the combine or a pro day and he runs like a sub 4.4, sub 4.3 type of 40, like you're not going to be like, oh man, I didn't know Arian Smith was that fast. It's like, you knew he was that fast. So the fact that he runs a fast time, fast guys run fast, as they often say, that doesn't necessarily boost his stock in any way, because it's like you saw that all over the film. The thing is, it's like it's checking boxes. And like that to me is kind of the conversation that I think needs to be had with Mike Green. It's like the one box that I don't think he's really checked is, does he have the ability to convert speed to power against NFL caliber offensive tackles? And we've had 2 opportunities to see him try to do that this week. And he was able to do it in a big way on Wednesday, and not necessarily being able to do that on Tuesday. And so we'll see if he can continue that on Thursday on the final day of practice, and then on Saturday for the final football game. So, those are that's why to me, like, I'm a little bit more impressed by the one positive rep of Mike Green on Wednesday's practice on day 2 of the Senior Bowl than I necessarily would be the 4 positive reps that you may see from Shamar Stewart from Wednesday's practice. So those are the things that I want to stress when we talk about these things, because I think far too often when we talk about, who's the star of the Senior Bowl, like people get wowed by things that you should have, if you actually, watch these guys play in college, already known. And so, and then you're probably sitting there going like, well, Aaron, like, weren't you impressed by certain guys like, Olu Oladejo from UCLA and Jay Tafuna from Utah on day 1, and you noted that you hadn't watched those guys. And like, that's a big reason why I was impressed. But like, when I go back and revisit these guys' film later in this offseason, I might see them winning, Tafuna winning with the power, Oladejo winning in the ways that he won this week at the Senior Bowl. And so those wins will become retroactively less impressive to me, because I'm like, oh, Oladejo, with a cross chop and a bull rush, like those are things that he was able to do effectively at UCLA throughout this past season. And so that's not nearly as impressive, say in March or April after I've revisited the film, as they were in January when I was not exposed to that. And so that's one of those things that I do want to stress coming across, because I'm sure some people, heard my not being glowing criticism of Mike Green from day 1 of the podcast, and sort of seeing it elsewhere and thinking like, oh, that's just Aaron being a contrarian again, or being a hater again. And it's like, no, it's just like, I think a lot of those other people, again, I think a lot of those other people just don't really understand what this event is really for. It's just like, yeah, like, I don't, if I already know you're fast, the fact that you're going to, run past guys in practice is not as impressive as it would be if I had speed concerns, right? If I was like, I don't know how fast this guy is compared to other players, and then you out here running past guys, then it's like, okay, that means a lot more than a fast guy that you already knew was fast, or big, strong guy that you already knew was big and strong, bullying guys. It's like, okay, yeah, cool, man. Like we already knew that about you. So that is the point I'm trying to make. So when it comes to Mike Green, that's why, to me, even if his win percentage was worse on day 2, that I would argue it was, than day 1, the ways that he was able to win on day 2 to me is far more impressive than any of the wins he had on day 1. So keep that in mind as we, continue talking about these Senior Bowls. But let's continue talking about some of the other standout guys in the trenches beyond Mike Green, beyond Shamar Stewart, other guys that really stood out to me and have stood out all week long. And we'll also talk about a guy that I went into this week with a lot of expectations in Princely Umanmielen of Ole Miss, and why he's disappointed me. And, that will give me an opportunity to rant about, how these various NFL teams have structured these Senior Bowl practices, which I think is contributing to why a guy like Princely hasn't necessarily had his big moment of the week. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting, wondering, and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. And now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who's going to give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, and everything with 100% accuracy. All so that you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So a couple of standout moments beyond the Mike Green moment in today's practice. To me, Donovan Ezuraku of Boston College, the edge rusher out of Boston College, had a very clean win against Marcus Mbow out of Purdue, and that involved a shoving match afterwards. Maybe Mbow got a little riled up because he didn't like getting beat, and there was a couple other times where Mbow got beat. And if you listen to yesterday's episode, Mbow was kind of giving up some of these wins. I have been less than impressed with Marcus Mbow through these 2 days of practice. He's played inside, he's played outside, and I have not seen him consistently take care of business this week. But there was another rep that he had against center when he was working at center, where Olu Oladejo, my guy from UCLA, hit him with a nice cross chop. Oladejo's been getting some work inside as well, like 1 rep each in practice, where he can rush against the interior O-line. And so, again, that's going to be a player that I'm going to revisit, having never heard of him until getting down here to Mobile and sort of revisiting. Is that something that he was regularly doing on his film, or is that something that is an added element that wasn't necessarily true during his college film? So that will be fun to go back and dive in. Josiah Stewart of Michigan, he was one of the most productive pass rushers in college football this past year, according to PFF. Him and David Walker of Central Arkansas, they continue to stand out in both days of practice. I think they've consistently been able to get some wins. And so there were a couple of other guys that to me stood out more on day 2 than they did on day 1 in these one-on-ones that we're talking about between the offensive defensive line. And they all came on the interior on the defensive line. That was D tackle Josh Farmer from Florida State, Darius Alexander from Toledo, and Aeneas Peebles out of Virginia Tech. And I feel like Darius Alexander was the most impressive interior D lineman on day 2 in the national practice. And I felt like he was consistently winning all of his reps. And so that is, again, another player that's now going to be like, okay, I need to go back and watch the film, because in day 1, I thought he was fine. Farmer, Peebles, I think, each one of those guys may have gotten 1 win over the course of practice, 1 impressive rep or whatever, but nothing to make you go like, and I feel like all of these guys had moments today that make me go, okay, I'm going to add you to the list. You may not be at the top of the list like Oladejo or Jay Tafuna from Utah, who we talked about yesterday, but you're going to be right after those guys when we go back and circle back to watching the film after the Senior Bowl to get eyes on these guys. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the offensive line, had the better day of the group, and certain guys I thought had very quiet or very rough day 1s of the Senior Bowl as they made those adjustments, and I felt like made very positive strides on day 2 that I think are worth pointing out. Jalen Travis, the offensive tackle, Iowa State, he was consistently losing reps on day 1. And a lot of those positive wins that we were talking about in our day 1 recap came against Jalen Travis. And then I think he was consistently winning on day 2. Right, he was the guy that shut down Mike Green when he tried to pull off an inside spin move on day 2 of this practice. And so shout out to Jalen Travis, who really stepped up, because that first day I was like, hey, does he really belong here? And then on day 2, he's like, okay, he does belong here. So Ozzy Trapillo, or Trapillo, I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, the offensive tackle from Boston College. Again, the same issue. He was consistently losing on day 1, but consistently winning on day 2. So that was impressive to see. Edge rusher Kyle Kennard for the American practice out of South Carolina had a very good bull rush against Carson Vincent, the offensive tackle out of Alabama A&M. And that's worth noting because I think Kennard has been the only guy that's really given Vincent some troubles, and he's been one of the more impressive offensive tackles on that American squad. And I know you'll probably hear Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta talking about Carson Vincent at some point this week or next week or some point in the future, just because he hails from that HBCU, and we know Jarvis from his days playing college football at HBCU at Albany State is very much pushing the HBCU agenda. I feel like D-Led has also been pushing that HBCU agenda as well on Twitter and elsewhere. So Carson Vincent, I think, has been very impressive, and certainly a guy, finding Alabama A&M film is going to be very hard, but we'll sort of have to see if we can scratch up something, because he's been very impressive so far at the Senior Bowl and showing that he has risen to the occasion of dealing with, the higher level of competition than necessarily he saw, playing college football. And so another tackle that I highlighted on day 1 that stood out to me was Anthony Belton in NC State. He's been playing inside and outside. It continues to lock it down. I don't think he lost any of his 4 reps today based off my eye. And I feel like he's like 7 for 7 or 8 for 8 or 7 for 8 or something like that so far this week when it comes to that. And so he is another guy that we discussed a lot yesterday about, potentially as a future Falcon. And he's seemingly making a lot of money this week, showing that inside-outside versatility. And so we'll see if, he makes too much money for the Falcons, because, again, as we discussed on yesterday's episode, we would like to see the Falcons draft a developmental offensive tackle. And at least, without watching the film of Anthony Belton, he checks a lot of the boxes that I think the Falcons should be looking for as a developmental offensive tackle in the middle rounds. But maybe, he's had a good enough week where it's like, well, maybe he won't last till the middle rounds, but we'll see on that front. Now, that gets me to a guy that disappointed me and has disappointed me through 2 days, and that is Princely Umanmielen, the Ole Miss edge rusher. I went into this week really expecting him to be the guy. Like, I was like, I was a little skeptical of Mike Green, this Mike Green hype. But, Princely is a guy that I think really has an opportunity to really stand out in this setting. He almost was able to win on an inside spin move today, but kind of stumbled trying to, finish that move, and so didn't get necessarily a clean win. But he was a player, and I talked to the Locked On Falcons insiders on my film breakdown as part of my Senior Bowl prep. Link in the description below if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider and get access to that 14-day free trial and $4.99 a month by hitting that link in the description at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. If you want to get my breakdown of him and Mike Green and so many other players going into this week. But he was a player that I was very intrigued. Basically, I've been joking with everybody here at the Senior Bowl that I'm ready to jump all in on the Princely Umanmielen bandwagon, pushing that sort of agenda. But one of the questions I had with Princely going into this week was like, I know he can win with speed, right? But a lot of his success winning with speed at the collegiate level during this past season at Ole Miss was, coming from a wide 9 technique. And that's not necessarily something that you get an opportunity to really do this week in these one-on-one settings. And so to me, this week was a big test to sort of see, can you win in other ways, outside of basically that wide 9, which for those of you unfamiliar is when you really line up way outside, like where the offensive tackle is here and you're way out here. And so that allows you to build up a lot of speed. That really gives offensive tackles a lot of troubles with speed. You can recall, the season opener against the Panthers 2 years ago in 23, where Caleb McGarry got beat a couple of times by Brian Burns, largely due to being in a wide 9. And when you have issues with speed like McGarry does going up against a premier speed rusher, and then you put him in the wide 9, it's really just unfair. And so that has been something I think Umanmielen has feasted on at the collegiate level. And wanted to know, could he win other ways at the Senior Bowl, because he wouldn't get those necessarily opportunities in the one-on-ones. And so far the answer is no. But I think part of the reason why Umanmielen hasn't had that opportunity to win, this gives me an opportunity to kind of complain about the practice and structure and the pace of some of these practices. There's two different practices. You have the national team in the morning, you have the American team in the afternoon. The American team is where a lot of the SEC schools, a couple of West Coast schools are, fulfill those teams. It used to be, I think, North and South when they used to do the Senior Bowl. And that structure still exists, but is now just national and American. But, one of the things I noticed when I was going through my notes and going back through the film of the one-on-ones is like on the national practice today, I counted 44 different reps. They did one-on-ones for 12 minutes, the offensive and defensive line, right? And they were able to get 44 reps done. And you contrast that with like 8 minutes that the American practice was able to do. And they only got maybe, I think, 26, if my math is correct. And that's an increase from yesterday, because I think yesterday only got like 6 minutes. I was at least able to only record like 6 minutes, and maybe they got like one other minute or two that I might have missed in regard. And so I think that's contributing, because basically in the national practice, these offensive and defensive linemen are getting much more opportunities. It's basically, that many reps, you're getting like 4 opportunities for each offensive lineman, 3 opportunities for each pass rusher, based off of that many reps. And you're getting maybe 2, maybe 3 reps for each offensive lineman in the American practice, given it, and then less than 2 on average for the defensive lineman. And it's just a slower pace in the American practice. It's a much more boring. I always struggle, staying focused for the American practice, because it's the ladder of 2, late in the afternoon. And then the way that the American team is structuring their practice is making that even doubly hard to really stay focused and locked in those practices, just because of the lack of energy, the snail's pace that they're moving through. They spend basically the first hour just kind of warming up, and then they get like a 20-minute injection of like team sessions and one-on-ones where there's energy and whatnot, and then they just go back to like whatever. And it's just like we're getting 20 minutes of like good practice to watch. And so the reason I bring that up is just because like I feel like if Princely was in the American or in the national practice, like basically I've seen him 3 reps in one-on-ones in 2 days, where like you compare that to Mike Green. I feel like Mike Green's had like 7 or 8 reps in 2 days. And so that's where I'm saying like, man, the American coaches, I'm looking at you, Bubba Ventrone, who's the special teams coordinator for the Browns, who's the head coach of the American team. I'm going to be slandering you for the rest of your life. I don't care how good a special teams coach you are. You don't understand how to run these practices, at least as far as NFL scouts and teams are concerned, as well as media folks like myself that are here on hand. But man, it's tough, because it's just like you don't really get opportunities to really see these guys shine in the ways that they could shine, or continue to struggle in the ways that it's just like 3 reps. Like that's all we're going to get. We might get 2 more tomorrow. It's like 5 practice reps that we can really evaluate these guys. When you look at in the American team, where on the national side, you're going to get like a dozen or more reps for almost all of these guys that you can really evaluate. And you can say, okay, like he won 6 of these. He lost 6 of these. He won 8 of these. He lost 4 of these. And it's like with the American team, it's like you had 5, and it's like, okay, well, you won 2 of these, but okay, but you could have won like 6 more if you had gotten more reps. So just wanted to complain a little bit of, again, this is the nitty gritty. I know none of you guys care about this, but if you're wondering why some of these American team guys, why aren't these guys creating buzz? I think this is a contributing factor to this, because they're just not getting as many opportunities to shine as their national counterparts. And so we'll see if that translates into the game on Saturday, where is the national team better prepared for the game, or is there some, method to Bubba Ventrone's madness, and the American team comes out, swinging on Saturday, just because they really have been taking it slow all week long. So we'll see on that. But a couple of guys on that American squad hail from the University of Georgia that are darn good dogs, and we'll talk about what those guys did, as well as some other observations and odds and ends from day 2 of this Senior Bowl practice. So if you want to start your 2025 off strong, or you want to continue your 2025 off strong, then why don't go to more live events? And Game Time is going to make it easier to get tickets to those live events, whether it's sports, comedy, music, or theater. And they have a new feature called Game Time Picks, which is going to filter out the fluff and only show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And we love Game Time's features in the app, like they're all in pricing, that all you got to do is toggle it on when you are in the app, and you'll get the total cost up front. Don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. We know we hate those hidden fees where it's like, oh, I got a deal, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get slapped on with all these hidden fees, and it's like that deal just completely evaporates. And then what you see is what you get. We love the panoramic seat views in Game Time, where you know exactly what you're getting when you buy, because you can pick out your seats and know exactly what your view is going to be for whatever event you have. So if you want to take advantage of these great offers and great features from Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So let's talk about those darn good dogs. You know, a couple of Georgia guys, because I'm so bored at the American practice. I'm like, okay, well, nothing's going on with the offensive line and defensive line. Let's focus on some of these Georgia guys to get something out of this. But one D lineman that has stood out, I think, in the limited opportunities he's had in these practices is Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins from Georgia. Was a player I wasn't particularly familiar with. For those of you that don't know, like, I'm not a hardcore Georgia fan. You know, I try to keep abreast of the team just because, you know, of the market that I'm in, but not necessarily that involved in the nitty gritty. And so TID, as I'm sure he's affectionately called, or at least what I'm affectionately called, you know, he won his solo rep in the one-on-ones today or yesterday as an edge rusher, sort of overpowering Jonah Savainaya. I think that's how you pronounce it. We're still working on that. And today he did get 2 reps rushing on the interior, and he was able to use his power. He wasn't as effective getting sort of firm wins in those regard, but I think he was able to generate a lot of power with his first step. And so clearly that is something that he has. And so it'll be interesting to go back and watch his film. I know he was one of the more productive from a per snap basis, according to PFF, for the Georgia pass rushers this week or this past season. And so has had also some good reps against the run where he felt like an immovable object. But we, of course, know all Georgia D linemen do not get moved off the ball against the run. That is just something I have not seen in like 4 years watching the Georgia defense when I get the opportunity to do so. So all of those guys are solid in the run game, and it shows TID when I was able to watch him in some of those one-on-ones when they were doing more run fits as opposed to pass rushing the quarterback. But linebacker Smail Munden is another Georgia guy that's down here. When I got to focus on him in one-on-one coverage drills against the running backs, I thought he looked good. He's not necessarily the fastest guy out there at the linebacker position at the Senior Bowl this week, but has generally looked solid both in one-on-ones as well as team drills. Safety Dan Jackson, hard to glean much in this setting because safeties are just kind of parked. He's been basically a free safety in the team drills, and you're not really allowed to really do a whole lot because it's not like real football thing. So the game, I think, is going to tell us a lot more about Dan Jackson in this setting than necessarily what he's going to do in practice. But you did get one. I did notice one-on-one against the tight end. I think it was Jake Briningstool out of Clemson, where he did a nice job breaking up the pass, did a good job face guarding the throw and breaking it up at the catch point. And then there was one time in the team drills where he was able to pop a guy, right? You know, you're not allowed to tackle in these settings, but it just kind of like just to let him know he's there, like where you could hear those pads hitting. And Dan Jackson was like, yeah, I'm here, my guy. And so, you know, I know Jarvis is a fan of him and talking about him as like a big time special teams guy, potentially at the next level. Trevor Etienne, the running back from Georgia, when I saw him as a pass catcher in the one-on-ones, he had 2 wins there. He had an excellent catch where he made a great adjustment in the air, kind of showing some body control and great hands to kind of twist around in the air to make a catch, a contested catch situation there. Arian Smith, the wide receiver, every time I've noticed Arian Smith, it's been when he's dropping passes, and that has been something that was plaguing him. That's one of the few things I did notice when I did get to watch Georgia this past fall and winter. Arian Smith dropping a lot of balls. That has continued this week. It feels like every other rep in drills and whatnot, he's dropping those passes. And so, you know, Arian might have to make the conversion to cornerback at this stage, right? He's a fast guy, can play some special teams, and I'm just like, I don't know if wide receiver's in your future guy, just because you cannot catch the football. But, that problem was not solved so far through 2 days at the Senior Bowl. We'll wrap up with a couple of other standouts. SMU running back Brashard Smith was a guy that I popped to me a couple of times on day one. He popped again on day two, just looked so smooth and explosive as a running back. Oklahoma State linebacker Nick Martin was a blanket in coverage in one-on-ones against the running backs, and we know that that's something to keep an eye on just because we think the Falcons are going to be looking for more athleticism, speed, and coverage ability at that linebacker position this offseason. And then I was focusing on the national safeties in warmups, not necessarily going through the one-on-one drills and whatnot, but at least in warmups, Navy safety Raywan Lane was the guy that moved the best in those warm-up drills and whatnot. Does that mean that he's a better player? No, again, you base that off the film and whatnot, but just purely off of who's the smoothest mover, he among the national safeties, I thought Lane was the most impressive. And then we'll talk about the quarterbacks briefly, because we always care about the quarterbacks, even when we don't need a quarterback. To my eyes, continuing on day two, Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon seems to be the most impressive of the 7 quarterbacks here. But I haven't really been keen on the quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe out of Alabama did have a nice deep ball today in practices as well during the team setting. So we'll see, if one of these quarterbacks pops. Again, Falcons aren't necessarily in the market for a quarterback, although, I do have fantasies about, having 2 left-handed quarterbacks, with Dillon Gabriel being another left-handed quarterback along with Michael Penix and whatnot. I'm fully embracing the Southpaws at this stage. But that is going to do it for us, guys, here on today's Locked On Falcons. Appreciate you for tuning in for another Day 2 recap. We'll be back with more tomorrow, although I will probably miss a good chunk of the national practice just because of my Locked On Sports Atlanta obligations. But if you want to get more lowdown on how some of our observations, Jarvis and mine, this week impact what the Falcons are going to do, make sure you check out that live show at, I believe, 10 p.m. East or 10 a.m. Eastern time on Locked On Sports Atlanta. And of course, that will be available on Locked On Falcons in your audio feeds as well on Thursday. But we'll be back with more on day 3, just sort of to give you maybe an overall recap and whatnot. So hopefully, that American practice will pick up and we'll have more positive things to say about that. But if you want to tune in, make sure you check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you check out the Locked On NFL show to get the lowdown what's going on around the NFL. Who are the Saints going to hire as a head coach? I'm sure those 2 shows have some thoughts on that, so check them out. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.